Right. Good evening, everyone. Hello.
Good evening, ma'am.
Right. Okay. I think right. Fatima Hasika, you can mute your mic for a while. Right. Okay. Now, it's the same batch, no, that I did educational psychology. Is it the
Yeah,
same
ma'am.
batch? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Okay. Your assignment presentation is pending, no?
Yeah, we have to get it clarified, ma'am. The administration asked us to just upload the PowerPoint presentation.
Uh-huh.
And when will we will be having the presentation online, ma'am?
That, of course, you have to actually check with the institute. I have given the
Right,
date,
ma'am.
Poya day. This 29th is the Poya kill I heard. I told if
Right,
you
ma'am.
can fix it for the Poya day, that is better killer, but everything actually you have to discuss with them. Did I give you a kind of a written assignment?
Not yet, ma'am.
For psychology, I didn't give you a written assignment also, no?
Yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh. Right. Okay. Then today I'm starting educational technology. Okay. That is also, we will be covering it in 10 sessions live. Um, so educational technology is the module we do. So what is educational technology? If I ask you, what is educational technology? Actually, educational technology is everything that facilitates the learning teaching process. You can define educational technology as everything that is related to the facilitation of learning teaching process. Okay, learning teaching process. Technology of education, technology for education. Both are there. What is technology of education and technology for education? Technology of education means how you can teach, what happens in the learning teaching process. And education, technology for education is how you can use technology to facilitate education. Like now, today we are having an online class. It is a technology for education, right? In the schools also. Educational technology has two main areas. Technology for education, technology of education. So technology of education means it's not only this use of ICT. right? It's not the use of ICT in education, but it goes beyond, and it is the processes related to learning and teaching process. You get my clarification there, explanation there? Do you get it? Do you get it? Or do you want me to explain it again?
Explain it again, ma'am.
Right, I will
Ma'am,
explain
please,
it
could you
again.
please explain it?
Sorry?
Could you please explain it again, ma'am?
Okay, I will. Don't worry. Uh, so, now our module is educational technology. So, educational technology, you might think, what is this all about? Okay. Educational technology means the processes that involves in designing, developing, implementing, and evaluating the learning teaching process. If not, the processes involved in learning and teaching. That is educational technology. Do you understand that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, when it comes to educational technology, it refers to the combined use of hardware and software. What is combined use of hardware and software? Hardware is if you use computers, LMS, videos to teach or to facilitate learning teaching. That is hardware. But if you use appropriate approaches, methods, techniques to facilitate learning and teaching, if you use materials which are really appropriate, that is software, right, in educational technology. So I will further explain it. I will further explain it. Now our module is educational technology. So educational technology, you can actually say, is, or educational technology means the processes involved in the learning and teaching process. The processes involved in learning and teaching. So the processes involved in learning and teaching, they are of two types: software and hardware. Software and hardware. So in technology of education, what is software? What is software? Education, actually software to, now hardware is actually the use of computers, use of LMS, use of videos, that is termed as hardware, right? So to actually facilitate learning and teaching, you use hardware. That is, you use, now today we are using online platform. I show you sometimes videos, and all these are hardware. Software is, I select appropriate technologies, appropriate methods, appropriate approaches, appropriate strategies. I give you group work, I give you pair work. I actually select the material appropriately. They are all the software component of educational technology. Is it clear or it's not clear?
Yeah, ma'am.
Right.
Now it's clear, ma'am.
Right, okay. Now, keeping that in mind, we will first start with software part. What will we start it with? The software part. That means the selection of appropriate approaches, methods, and techniques in teaching and learning, right? The selection of appropriate methods, approaches, and techniques in the learning and teaching process. Okay,
Okay, ma'am.
right. You have to be mindful about your background noise. If there is background noise, Pute, have your mic muted because we are disturbed now otherwise. Right. Have your mic muted. When you want to speak, you can actually unmute. Okay. Now I actually introduce you to the module. So this module is about learning and teaching process. And this learning and teaching process, we divide it into two parts. That is hardware and software. We start with the software, that is the selection of appropriate approaches, methods, and techniques and materials in the process of learning and teaching. Okay, අපි කියනවා methodology කියලා. We call it methodology. So if you are a teacher, right, when you actually have to teach, any teacher would actually have to decide on the methodology. What is this methodology? What to teach? What are the aims of teaching? And how I'm going to teach? That is the concept of teaching. If not, that is methodology. The teacher has to decide what to teach, what are the aims of teaching, and how to teach. How am I going to teach this? So that is actually the software of educational technology. The teachers, they have to decide what am I to teach them, what's the aim of teaching, and how am I going to teach this to my students. So we term it as the software approach to educational technology. Okay, so we are going to look at what is teaching approach, method, and technique කියලා. Now if you are a teacher, that you have to decide, I have to teach this is what I have to teach today, and what is the aim of my teaching today, right? What will my students be able to do at the end of the lesson, and how am I going to teach that? Am I going to explain everything, or am I going to get them to do a kind of a project? Am I get them to watch a video like that? What kind of materials that I'm going to use? And you have to decide. So what to teach, what's the aim of teaching, and how am I going to teach? So that is actually the software approach to educational technology. Any teacher has to decide on these things when you have a teaching setup. So then this what to teach, aim of teaching, and how am I going to teach? This how am I going to teach, the methodology of teaching, right? It consists of three kind of interconnected, interlaced components. How am I going to teach? The methodology, it consists of three interconnected components. What are the three interconnected components that the methodology consists of? Approach, method, and technique. What are they?
Hello, Miss.
Yeah.
Approach method. Miss, did you share the screen?
Yeah, I'm sharing.
I can't see anything.
Okay, let me see.
Are you okay, ma'am? I
Uh.
thought that ma'am had shared the screen.
No, now it's a Word document I'm sharing, a
Now
PDF.
okay, Miss.
Right,
All
okay,
right.
sorry about it, okay?
It's okay, Miss.
Right. Now you know approach, method, and techniques. Approach, method, and technique. So when you have to do a little bit of teaching, that you have to decide on this methodology. how am I going to teach? Okay, how am I going to teach? So when you want to decide how am I going to teach, that is termed as methodology, right? That methodology consists of three interconnected components. What are the three interconnected components that how am I going to teach this lesson has? Approach, method, and technique. Approach, method, and technique. Now, any little teaching that you're going to do. So if you're a professional teacher, a qualified teacher, what will come to your mind? What is my approach? What are my method or methods? What are the techniques that I'm going to use? That is how you're going to plan your teaching, how you're going to do the teaching, right? What is the broadest component? What is the, out of the three components, what is the broadest?
Approach.
Approach. It is the broadest one. Approach means your belief about teaching. Approach is the teacher's set of beliefs about teaching and learning. Approach is the teacher's beliefs or assumptions about how learning and teaching happens. You have your own set of beliefs about how learning and teaching happens. So there are two main approaches. What are the two main approaches to select from? Teacher-centered approach and student-centered approach. What are the two approaches? Teacher-centered approach and student-centered approach. So you have to decide on one of these. Am I going to teach this using the teacher-centered approach? Or am I going to teach this using the student-centered approach? So you do not know what they are yet, but we will be discussing them. But approach is very broad, and they are the philosophical assumptions of teacher about how learning and teaching happens. So what you believe in how learning and teaching happens? Do you believe in teacher-centered approach or do you believe in student-centered approach? And accordingly, you first decide, I'm going to teach this lesson using the teacher-centered approach. I'm going to teach this lesson using the student-centered approach. So we will be discussing these separately, what is teacher-centered, what is student-centered. But for the time being, that you should know, approach is very broad, and that is the philosophical assumption or the beliefs of the teacher about how teaching and learning happens. Ek teacher ki belief එක. Okay? So the teacher can decide between teacher-centered or student-centered. So based on the approach that you select, whether you're going teacher-centered or student-centered, that is your belief, no? Nobody can question it. Axiomatic. 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 That is, nobody can question why you are teacher-centered here, why you are student-centered here. It's your belief. It's your understanding about teaching and learning for this particular lesson. That is what you think is good. Right? It is axiomatic. Axiomatic. And based on the approach you select, you can select the method or methods that you are going to use in doing the lesson. Methods are procedural. Methods are procedural. Procedural means, now if you are a teacher-centered teacher, you will use lecture method or demonstration method. Teacher in front, right? Teacher is the authority. If you're a student-centered teacher, you will select projects, flip method. You will select discussions. Students' participation is high because your approach is student-centered. Accordingly, the methods are selected, right? And then if you take techniques, techniques are narrower than methods. Based on the approach, you will select method or methods, And based on the methods, you will select the classroom techniques. So classroom techniques are implementational. That is, in doing the lesson, you have to use little techniques like group work, pair work, questioning, brainstorming, storytelling, recitation, like that. So you have to select which are in alignment with the method or methods you selected. The methods are in alignment with the approach that you select. So first you will select the approach. Based on the approach that you select, you will select the method or methods. And based on the methods you selected, you will select the techniques for the classroom teaching. I think that it is interconnected, I told you. Why did I say interconnected? It's like this. Now, this is outside classroom example, right? Now, suppose you're having pimples. Suppose you're having pimples, okay? Now, like the teacher has to do a classroom teaching wage. You have pimples, so you want to actually get it cured. So your approach is your set of beliefs about cure for pimples. So approaches may be that you can go to a Western doctor and get laser treatment. With an laser, you can go to a Western treatment doctor. You can go to an Ayurvedic doctor. If not, you can go to a beautician. So there are three approaches. So what you believe in, it's very axiomatic. It's up to you. It's your belief. So you believe in Ayurveda. So out of the three, you will select the Ayurvedic doctor. That is your set of beliefs about cure for pimples. You got it? You got it? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Right.
ma'am.
Then now if you select Ayurvedic treatment, that is your set of beliefs because you believe in Ayurvedic treatment. So the methods of treating the pimples will be concoction, steam bath, steam bath, concoction, kasaya දෙනවා කියන්නේ, like that. But if you decide on Western medicine, that is your approach, then your methods will be laser treatment, antibiotics, and some ointment to apply. If your approach is you have the belief, you believe in beauty culture, so that is your approach. Your methods are different. You will not go for concoction or antibiotic treatment. Instead, your methods will be facials and all that. Am I right?
Yes, yeah, ma'am.
Similarly, if you select teacher-centered, the methods and techniques are accordingly chosen. If you select student-centered as the approach, it's your set of beliefs, right? Nobody can question that. It's your method. Then accordingly, the methods and techniques differ, right? And now the same pimples example. Now you decided on Western doctor because that is what you believe in. And then your method will be laser treatment and antibiotic treatment. And then the techniques will be, right. You have to take antibiotics 3 times a day. Laser treatments once a month or once a week. If you decide on Ayurveda, the techniques will be not to eat any heaty food, right? Not to eat any heaty food, like that. So the techniques are connected to the methods and the approaches that you select. So approach is actually axiomatic. Nobody can question. It's up to you. It's your belief. And based on the approach that you select, you will select the suitable methods to do the teaching. And based on the suitable methods, the implementation level, the classroom techniques. If you're a teacher-centered teacher, you will not be having group work or pair work in the classroom as a technique. You will not have. There's no need, right? But if you are a student-centered approach teacher today, and then you will have discussion as a method and group work, pair work as a technique. So these three are interconnected. Teachers first decide on the approach. It is actually the set of assumptions that the teacher has about teaching and learning, and nobody can question it. It's axiomatic. And based on that, the teacher will have to select method or methods. They are procedural. And based on the methods, the techniques are selected at the implementation level. Okay. Now, this is the task of the teacher when you have to do a classroom teaching. You can't just walk into the classroom and the way you want, you can't teach. You have to plan your lessons. Planning your lessons means you have to decide what am I going to teach my students and what is the aim of my teaching. How am I going to teach? What is my approach? What are the techniques and methods that I'm going to use? That is about educational technology, the software component of it. So this is what we are going to actually learn in this module. And when you select approach, methods and techniques and how to plan lessons and how to write lesson plans, that is what we are going to look at in this module. Right. Is it clear to you, dear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, good. Then we'll come to this. The main approaches to teach. Now we are first looking at approaches. What is it? Approach. It's very broad. First you decide on the approach, right? Your set of beliefs about learning and teaching, how it happens. So we are first looking at this term approach. When it comes to approaches to teaching and learning, there are two main approaches. What are the approaches that we have? Teacher-centered approach and student-centered approach. Teacher-centered approach to teaching and student-centered approach to teaching. So have you got any idea about this teacher-centered approach to teaching and student-centered approach to teaching? Have you got any idea? I think most of you all are from teaching colleges, training colleges. You can't say no if you're products of teacher training colleges. This is one of the basics that you learn. More background noise. නම් මට දරා ගන්න අමාරුයි දරුවනේ.
වන්දනේ පාරෙන් දාන්න. බාරගෙදර මිනිස්සු.
Okay. Now let's see. I want you to have you have pen and paper with you, a piece of paper, and you are making notes while discussion is going on. So you can have teacher-centered approach and student-centered approach. One full page divided into two columns. The first column is teacher-centered approach to teaching, and the second column is student-centered approach to teaching. Have you done that?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So now I'm going to actually give you features of teacher-centered and student-centered approaches. And you have to make your notes. You have to make your notes. Right. Number one. Right. Number one. Number one. Grounded on behaviorism. Teacher-centered. Okay. Teacher-centered approach is grounded on behaviorism. Did you write?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Now in the second
Excuse me,
column,
ma'am.
students, yeah,
Could you please repeat, ma'am?
yeah. Now, number 1, okay? Number 1 එකට ලියනවා teacher centered approach. ඒක තියනවනේ උඩ ලියලා. ඒතර යටින්
Yes,
ලියනවා
ma'am.
ඔයා in that column is grounded on behaviorism. Is grounded on behaviorism. Is
Okay,
grounded
ma'am.
on
Thank you.
behaviorism. Okay. Right. Okay. Somebody is traveling in an express train. Who is that traveling in an express train? Shafiq. Oh, Shafiq is traveling. Okay. And then you know, student-centered එක grounded on constructivism. Grounded on constructivism. Got it? Got it?
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
So I will further explain it. Don't worry, right? එක explain වෙනවා ඊළඟ එකට. Second one, number 2. Behaviorism. Learning is habit formation. Behaviorism. Learning is habit formation. Constructivism. Learning is knowledge construction. Knowledge construction. Learning is trial and error. Learning is discovery learning. So අපි දෙවනි number 2 එකේ behaviorism. Learning is habit formation. Do it over and over and form a habit. That is what is learning all about. In constructivism, in the other column, learning is trial and error process. Learning is discovery learning. Learning is constructing new knowledge by the student, by the learners. Got it? Got it?
Okay,
Yes.
ma'am.
Right. We'll go to number 3 now. Number 3. Teacher-centered, okay? In that column, you write, learner is an empty vessel. Learner is an empty vessel. His භාජනයක් learner කියන්නේ. Learner is an empty vessel. That is behaviorism. Your learner is an empty vessel. That is behaviorism. But if you go to constructivism, are you in that column now? Right. Learner has prior knowledge. Learner has prior knowledge, existing knowledge. Learner has prior knowledge, existing knowledge. They are not empty vessel, in other words. They have prior knowledge or existing knowledge. Got it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Then number 4 or 5?
Number 4.
Number 4.
Number 4. Number 4, behaviorism. Learner is passive. Learner is passive. They just listen and learn. Learner is passive. They just listen and learn. In constructivism, are you in that column?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah. Learner is active. Learner is active. They do it and learn. They do it and learn. Apna listen and learn, metana do it and learn. Okay? Right. Can we go to the next one? What is the number? Number
5.
5. Okay. Teacher, behaviorism. Okay. In that column, teacher is authoritative. Teacher is authoritative. Authoritative කියලා කියන්නේ මොකක්ද? Authoritative කියලා කියන්නේ she decides what to teach, how to teach. Teacher goes in front of the class. Teacher talks to the students and maintains a hierarchical relationship with the student. Teacher is superior, students are inferior. That is teacher authority. Teacher is authoritative in teacher-centered approach to teaching. But in the other column, student-centered approach. Okay. Teacher is a co-learner. Teacher is a co-learner. Teacher is a facilitator. Teacher is a facilitator. Teacher is a guide. අතන තියෙන්නේ hierarchical relationship. Here, reciprocal relationship. Reciprocal. RECIPROCAL. Reciprocal relationship. Both ways. That means not hierarchical, equal. Right? Reciprocal relationship with the students. In student-centered. It means that teacher doesn't think that she knows everything and she has to manage the class. She has to instruct the class. Students have to listen. No. You discuss and do things. You're going to discuss with your students what you are going to do and whether they are okay with them and all that. Okay. Now we go to the next point. Number 6 or
6.
6. Okay. In number 6, number 6, teacher talk time is very high. Teacher talk time is very high because teacher imparts knowledge. Teacher imparts knowledge. Teacher is a knowledge imparter. Teacher ගාව තමයි දැනුම තියෙන්නේ. Teacher ඒ දැනුම ළමයින්ට බෙදා හරිනවා. ළමයින්ට දෙනවා. Teacher talk is high for teacher is the knowledge imparter. That is behaviorism. Right. Go to student centered. Okay. Teacher is a knowledge manager. Teacher is a knowledge manager, not knowledge imparter. Knowledge manager. And student talk time is high. Student talk time is high. What does it mean? Teacher doesn't go in front of the class and go on telling what she knows. Instead, teacher brings materials. Teacher actually gets the students to do activities, plan lessons, and students are working and discovering new knowledge. And teacher is facilitating the discovery. Okay? Students are actively doing something to discover new knowledge with the guidance of the teacher in student-centered approach. Okay. Then, next point. Number 7. අපි කියනවා discipline is very important. Discipline is very important. And silent classrooms are expected. But in student-centered approach, self-imposed discipline is promoted. Self-imposed කියලා කියන්නේ ළමයිට බලෙන් නීති දාන්නේ නැහැ. ළමයා දන්නවා how to behave, what to do and what not to do. That kind of training is given to them. So self-imposed discipline is promoted. Okay. Classrooms are not silent but noisy. Classrooms are not silent but noisy because the students are active. Okay. Right. Then that is actually some criteria to decide on distinguish between teacher-centered approach and student-centered approach. Okay. Teacher-centered approach and student-centered approach. Teacher-centered approach, you know what it is like. And out of the two, what is the traditional classroom out of the two? Is it teacher-centered class or the student-centered class?
Teacher-centered.
Yeah, teacher-centered traditional classroom. So now you have to first decide which approach that you are going to actually select first. Whether you are going teacher-centered or whether you are going student-centered. It depends on various criteria. It depends on several criteria. You can't just decide whether you are going teacher-centered or student-centered because both the approaches have their own advantages and disadvantages. No approach is error-free. No approach is 100% good. Okay. So both have their pros and cons. So you have to think of your context and select which approach you're going to select. Is it clear to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Hari. Others? කියන්න බලන්න තේරුණාද කියලා.
Yeah, ma'am.
Now, before coming to that, what criteria makes you to decide whether you're going teacher-centered or student-centered? Before coming to that, I have a small activity. Here, read the definitions of some other approaches. One extreme, you have teacher-centered approach. The other end of the continuum, you have the student-centered approach. In between, there are some other approaches. They actually basically go with either teacher-centered or student-centered. So you know some characteristics of teacher-centered and student-centered, and you can tell whether they are more into teacher-centered or student-centered. The first one. I'm going to make some other approaches to teaching. This one. Read it. Can one of you read?
Subject matter centered approach. Subject matter gains primacy over that of the learner.
Learner. Now, there's another approach coming in between these two extremes. Subject matter centered approach. In that subject matter centered approach, what is more important is not the learner, whether they learn, but covering the subject matter, but covering the syllabus. Okay. So this goes more into student-centered or teacher-centered?
Teacher-centered.
Teacher-centered. Okay. So ඒකෙන් ඔයාලට තව criteria ටිකක් teacher-centered and student-centered එකට ලැබෙනවා. That is the purpose of this exercise. Okay. Now go to the second one. Teacher-dominated approach. In this approach, only the teacher's voice is heard. He or she is the sole dispenser of information. Teacher-dominated approach. Only teacher's voice is heard. Teacher talk time is high. She is a knowledge dispenser. So make a teacher-centered, the student-centered approach.
Teacher-centered.
Teacher-centered.
Yeah, highly teacher-centered. Then there's another one. Interactive approach. Classroom activities are a priority and there is more student talk and less teacher talk.
Student.
Student-centered.
Very good. It is student-centered, more into student-centered approach, right? Very good. Now the next one. Constructivist approach. The students are expected to construct knowledge and meaning by connecting to the prior knowledge. Students are not empty vessels, but they have their prior knowledge. කියලා මොකේද තියෙන්නේ?
Student-centered.
Student-centered. Very good. Student-centered. Then next one, banking approach. In the banking approach, the teacher deposits knowledge into the empty minds of students for them to commit it to memory. Teacher deposits knowledge into the empty minds of students.
Teacher-centered.
Teacher-centered.
Highly teacher-centered because students are empty vessels. Teacher spoon feed them, right? Spoon feed karana. The next one, integrated approach. It makes the teacher connects what he or she teaches to other lessons of the same subjects or connects his or her lessons with other subjects, interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. Integrated approach.
Teacher-centered.
It is highly student-centered. What is it? Highly student-centered. Integration of skills, integration of subject matter. That happens in student-centered classroom. Okay? පොඩක් අපිට කියවුන්නේ නැති එකක් අලුත් criteria එකක්. Then collaborative approach. It will welcome teamwork, pair work, group discussion.
Student-centered.
Student-centered. Very good. Next one, individualistic approach. It gets students to work by themselves.
Student-centered.
No. Individualistic approach. It gets students to work by themselves, not with working, sharing knowledge or nothing is there.
Teacher-centered.
Teacher-centered. Teacher-centered. Direct teaching approach. Teacher directly tells or shows what to be taught.
Teacher-centered.
Very good. Indirect guided approach. The teacher guides the learner to discover things for himself, herself. The teacher facilitates the learning process by allowing the learner to be engaged in the learning process with his or her guidance.
Student-centered.
Student-centered. Okay. Now, when I send you this material, I think you can actually look at the 2 columns you completed. And you can look at this activity as well. So when you read them, you will get a lot of facts, words, phrases that you can use in talking about teacher-centered and student-centered approach. Okay? Okay,
Okay, madam.
Ma'am.
now I have a small activity for you. This is the activity. Can you just tell me what factors or what criteria background noise. So I can't talk. I'm disturbed. Sorry about it. Okay? It's very difficult for me. Right. Now we'll make a list of it. What criteria, what facts, what factors decide you to select either teacher-centered or student-centered? What makes you to decide on one of these? Right? What are the criteria? කියලා කියනවා. මොකද්ද පළවෙනි එක? මොකද්ද පළවෙනි එක? එකක් තමයි the size of the class. මොකද්ද? The size of the class. The first criteria is the size of the class. Why? If you have about 100 students in the class, can you use student-centered approach and get them to be in groups and work in groups and cover new knowledge? Can you do that? No. You can't monitor. You can't. What you can do is you can go in front of the class and explain everything. Then even 10,000 students are there, you can use a mic and teach. But if it is a large class, size of the class, if it is a large class, you can't use student-centered approach. Whether you like it or not, you have to decide on teacher-centered. So it's an advantage of teacher-centered approach. You can cater to a large number of students. Second factor, time. පළවෙනි එක size of the class, second factor time. What is time consuming? Teacher going in front of the class and explaining, or getting the students to do some activity, work with others and discover new knowledge on their own, which is time consuming. Teacher explaining it or students to discover it, which is time consuming.
Students to discover?
Yeah, if the students to discover it, it's time consuming. Now, suppose you have a limited number of hours to cover a big syllabus, a vast area. Then actually you will decide on teacher-centered approach and you will explain everything, go in front of it and save time. But if it is actually a less amount of content and you have enough time, you can decide on being student-centered and get the students to work in groups and pairs and discover, and you become facilitator, though it is time consuming, right? So time is another contributing factor in selecting this two, either this or that. Can you think other one? Third එක තමයි the content to be taught. මොකද third එක? The content to be taught. Now suppose it's very hard facts. Something that is very difficult to understand on your own. Better teacher explains it first. So teacher decides, I go teacher-centered and explain everything first, especially when teaching grammar and all that. Right? If the teacher explains the grammar and then get the students to practice it, it's easier than getting the students to discover the grammar role. So depending on the content also, you decide whether you are going teacher-centered, you're going to explain everything first, or whether you're going to be student-centered, get the students to discover new knowledge. Construct, build new knowledge on the prior knowledge that they have. What are you going to do? How you are going to do? The difficulty level of the content, right? The content that you have to teach. Based on that also, you can decide whether you're going teacher-centered or student-centered. Okay then?
Okay, madam.
තව මොනවද දෙන්න පුළුවන්? Now අපි කිව්වා size of the class, time, content to be taught. තව මොනවද දෙන්න පුළුවන්? The level of the students. Level of the students. Next one is the level of the students. Suppose it's a very weak class, not motivated at all. Even if you want them to actually do something and discover new knowledge, because of the low ability levels, they will not be able to do that. Right? If it is a highly motivated and high level ability class, you don't have to think of teaching them teacher-centered. You can easily go student-centered and get them to discover the new knowledge. So the ability level of the student is also another determining factor. Okay,
Okay.
Right. So based on all that, you will decide what your approach to teaching that particular lesson is, Kela. Whether it is teacher-centered or student-centered. And once you decide on one of the approaches, then you have to actually select the methods that you have to use to teach that particular subject. And it all is connected to the approach that you select. So if you are basically teacher-centered and you decided on going teacher-centered in that approach, you have two main methods that you can use in the class. Very traditional and very typical. What are the methods? What are those two methods that be very commonly used in teacher-centered classroom? මොනවාද methods දෙක?
Lecture method, ma'am.
Very good. Lecture method. අනිත් එක demonstration method. In the demonstration method also students just see, observe, and teacher demonstrate, teacher shows. So lecture method and demonstration method, they are from teacher-centered approach. But if you select the student-centered approach, what are the methods that you will have to decide? Because you're going to get the students to discover new knowledge on their own by working with, sorry?
Flip methods, discussion.
Very good. Discussion, flip method, project method, assignment method, scientific method, project method. All these are student-centered approach related methods. So you can't say I am a I have selected teacher-centered approach and then I am actually doing a discussion using discussion method. It can't happen, right? So that is alignment. Based on the approach that you select, you will select the method or the methods that you're going to use. Is it clear to you now?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, now let's look at these scenarios. Can one of you read the first one? So this is what you have to do. There are 4 scenarios. So what is your candid answer to the question? What's your conception of approach to teaching? මේ පළවෙනි scenario එකේ මොන approach එකද ඔයා තෝරගන්නේ? What aspects would you like to change in your teaching practice to do better align with your espoused conception of teaching and approach? So just tell me which approach you will select. This is the classroom scenario. So read the first one of you.
Teacher A prepared a lot of materials and tried his best to explain in as much detail as possible. He thinks the more he can tell the students, the more students can learn. Each question has a fixed answer, and as soon as students make mistakes, he moves on to the other students.
Yeah. This teacher is teacher-centered or student-centered teacher?
Teacher-centered teacher.
Yeah, he is a teacher-centered teacher. Why do you say that he's a teacher-centered teacher, Kela?
He prepared lot of materials and he's trying to tried his best to explain.
Yeah, he thinks that if he tells, the students learn more, Kela. Right? Teacher talk time is high, Kela එයා හිතන්නේ. So students are passive. And අපි කතා කරපුවට තව එකක් තියෙනවා. When the students make mistakes, what does he do?
He moves on to the other students.
Why is that? Is it correct? No, the teacher has to actually guide the learner towards the self-correction. Learner, him or herself, should correct the answer if it is student-centered. But as this teacher is a teacher-centered, using the teacher-centered approach, when a student makes a mistake, you're wrong. I will get the correct answer from the next student. But if you're student-centered, you ask guiding questions, probing questions, and get the learner to guide the learner towards the correct answer. But it doesn't happen here. So this is a highly teacher-centered approach. Okay, very good. So we come to the second scenario. Can you please read this?
Teacher B heard about activity learning and he decided the best way to teach is to play games and interact with his students. He accepted all students' responses because he wanted to show the students he is a kind teacher.
More into which approach?
Student-centered?
Yeah, a student-centered. He likes to actually get all the students give answers, and for some time, for the time being, he withholds feedback and get the learners to feel that to a certain extent you are correct and all that. Okay, so he is more into student centered. Okay, very good. So we'll come to the next one. Can you read? Can you read? Can you read?
Teachers see things about what is important in the subject area as well as what students would be interested to know and how she can link concepts with experience when preparing the materials. She varied her activities from lecturing, question and asking to group work. She was interested to find out what students know and do not know and why they cannot understand. The questions were of different types, and she listened to students' responses with interest to find out what they were thinking.
More into
Student-centered.
Student-centered.
definitely yes, because teacher doesn't go on talking without any understanding of what the students know, what they already know, prior knowledge, what their understanding is, and all that. No, he is actually concerned about all that, so he's into student-centered approach. Now the teacher D. Can you read?
Teacher D in her science class asked the class to look at the diagram of a microscope in the textbook. She then explained and wrote notes about these different parts of microscope. After that, she asked the students to complete the exercise in textbook, matching the names of major the components of a microscope with their functions.
Yeah. What is it?
Teacher centered.
Yeah, it is highly teacher-centered, no? Getting them to look at a diagram of a microscope and getting them to actually name the parts of a microscope. No activity based, nothing. It's actually just desk work, right? Not even taking the students to a lab to see a microscope, show them a microscope, right? So it's highly teacher-centered. Okay. So I think that the two main approaches to teaching, teacher-centered, the most traditional, and student-centered approach, the most modern and contemporary. So you know the characteristics of the two, but you can't say you are 100% teacher-centered or 100% student-centered, because both the approaches have their pros and cons and feasibility issues and all that. Because of that, you're going to decide how much of teacher-centered characteristics and how many student-centered characteristics are combined in your eclectic classroom. You're not going to be 100% teacher-centered or 100% student-centered, but more or less, you can decide on one of those based on the criteria: time, class size, content to be taught, then uh, level of the students. Yeah. Based on all that, you can decide how you're going to, which approach that you're going to actually use. So that is about the concept of teaching, how you're going to do your teaching. How you're going to do your teaching means what approaches, methods, and techniques that you're going to use. So you saw the interconnected components of this methodology: approach, method, and technique. Approach is a set of beliefs about teaching and learning. It is not questionable, it's axiomatic. It is broader. Methods are selected based on the approach and they are aligned. And methods are procedural. And techniques are at implementation level when you want to actually do teaching based on the approach and the method you select, that you will have to conduct pair work, group work, individual desk work, like that. So they are little techniques at implementation level. So we looked at, after that, we looked at the two main approaches, student-centered and teacher-centered, and their characteristics. And what contributes, what are the criteria to select teacher-centered or student-centered approach here. That is we discuss first. And then we can look at methods. So based on the approach that you select, you will have to decide on the methods that you're going to use. So what are the methods that you're going to use? Teaching methods. And now I told you, we can add something more to it. Now, whether you're going to select teacher-centered or student-centered approach, time allocation, size of the class, the content to be taught, and further you can add availability of teaching learning resources. Availability of teaching learning resources. So for example, if it is a packed classroom, not spacious enough, that you can't actually get them to actually sit in a circle and discuss. And then if you don't have lab facilities for the students to individually in groups to do an experiment, teacher can't help it but go teacher-centered and demonstrate it in front of class. So likewise, you have to think of the availability of the resources and individual learning styles also, because there are majority of the students are they prefer individual learning now. So you can actually take it as a criteria and decide on going teacher-centered as well. Now here in selecting the appropriate method, I have a brainstorming activity. Select the best method or methods you would use. Justify your answer. Remember, there is no the best method. Your answers may vary, but you have to tell me why you select that method. Okay. Now here letter A. It's a grade 4 science lesson on life cycle of the butterfly. It's a grade 4 science lesson on life cycle of the butterfly. You will select which method? Lecture method, demonstration method, discussion method, project method, flip method. What will you actually select here? Grade 4 science lesson on life cycle of the butterfly. Now think that you have to actually teach a grade 4 class the life cycle of a butterfly. What kind of a method that you can use? What do you think?
Discussion.
Discussion. Okay, why? Discussion is good when there is different opinions. Now, life cycle of a butterfly, can there be now like television is a boon or a bane, good or bad? There can be different opinions, am I right?
Yes.
Have life cycle of a butterfly discuss කරන්න එක දෙයක් තියෙනවද?
Yeah.
Project method.
How are you going to do the project method?
We'll ask the student to make a life cycle of a butterfly and us to present it to the class.
Okay, right. That is project method rather than it's a group work, that technique එකක් කියන්නේ නේද?
Yes, madam.
Doing a poster or something. Now, project එකක් නම් they have to actually do an investigation about the life cycle of a butterfly. Am I right?
Yeah. Yes, madam. It's a group work method.
එතන එක ටෙක්නික් එකක්. ඇත්තටම here ඇත්තටම it's a bit of more or less it's lecture method. Teacher explains it. Am I right?
Yes, madam.
Yes, madam.
Yeah. හැබැයි it doesn't mean that you have to be 100% lecture method. Teacher goes in front of the class and explains everything on the board. No. You can actually make it a little bit student centered as well. කොහොමද කරන්න යන්නේ? Lecture method එකක් තමයි. But still you can put them into groups and ask them to watch a video. Now you're playing a video and there they talk about the life cycle of the butterfly and you get them a match. What happens first? What happens next? What is the third stage? Like that. So rather than teacher telling it, students watch the video and match it. And then you get the students are now read it to the class. What is the life cycle of the butterfly in order? Am I right?
Yes, madam.
හැබැයි එක project method වත් discussion method එකක්වත් නෙමෙයි. Because it's very factual. Am I right?
Yes.
හැබැයි ඒකෙන් අදහස් කරන්නේ teacher goes in front of the class and explain everything. Teacher can actually tailor made it. ඒ කියන්නේ අපි කියනවා teacher centered approach එකක් තමයි lecture method එක. හැබැයි ඔයා ඒකට පොඩි changes add කරනවා. Add කරලා you are trying to make it a bit student centered. Got it? That is why I told you no 100% teacher centered or no 100% student centered. It's not feasible and all that here. Okay. Now go to the second one. B. Can you read B?
Grade 12 economic lesson. The term test is around the corner and one whole unit to be covered in a few periods. Lecture method, ma'am?
Definitely yes. Can you explain why?
Because this is within a particular time period, the syllabus need to be covered. If it is given for the students, it will take more time and teacher cannot achieve her target.
Yeah, because of the time factor. The teacher decides on the lecture method and after all, it's a grade 12 class. එතකොට grade 12 කියන්නේ adult learners. They can actually listen and learn easily. Am I right? Lecture method is suitable for the adults. Okay? So there are two things that you can highlight. Very good. Who is reading C? Who is reading C? Are you there?
The elementary level science teacher of a large class of 40 students to teach how iodine can be used to identify food rich in starch.
What's the suitable method here?
Depending on the size of the class, ma'am, lecture method is preferable.
Suitable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think depending on the size of the class, you can decide on lecture demonstration method, teacher-centered approach, demonstration method. Am I right? Because to teach how iodine can be used to identify food rich in starch. So teacher can demonstrate it in front of class. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely.
And now letter D.
Advanced level class and a project on dengue-free nation.
Okay, who is this? Who is this?
Teacher centered.
All right, advanced level class and a project on dengue-free nation. Teacher-centered or student-centered? It's project.
Student-centered.
It's highly and decide what they are going to do and think of the time plan, think of the budget, how to raise funds, and all these are done by students themselves. අපි project method එකේදී ඉගෙන ගන්නවා how it is to be conducted කියලා. So the students' involvement is very high and students only make decisions, right? And they actually find a problem and solve that problem. So because of that highly student centered. Okay. Next one, E.
English lesson in grade 10 class on TV, a balloon or a whale,
Yeah.
or discussion method, because
Yeah. Why do you
there are
say
very
it's discussion?
there may be various perspectives of the class.
Definitely, yes. Yeah.
Some may tell
Various
the
perspective, lot
advantages
of ideas to be generated. And at the same time, it's a grade 10 class, no? So grade 10 class means they are big enough to actually talk on this topic. If it is a small class, they might not having much ideas. But this is a grade 10 class, so they will actually very they will contribute to the topic, right? So definitely it's the discussion method. Right. Now අපි ගන්නවා පළවෙනි method එක. The lecture method. Okay? අපි දන්නවා the lecture method is අපි refer කරනවා chalk and talk method. Another term for lecture method is what?
Chalk and talk.
Yeah, chalk and talk method. So in the lecture method, the teachers are typical traditional teachers. They go in front of the class, write on the board and go on talking, right? So you refer to it as chalk and talk method කියලා, okay? හැබැයි ඉතින් ඒකේ තියෙනවා its own pluses and minuses. So if you have selected the lecture method, what is the approach? You are into teacher-centered approach or the student-centered approach?
Teacher-centered approach.
Teacher-centered
You are into teacher-centered approach. What about the teacher's role in the lecture method? Teacher is authoritative. Teacher is in front of class. Teacher knows everything. Teacher explains everything. Teacher talk time is high. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yes, teacher is active and students are passive learners.
Yeah. ඒක එනවා අන්තිම second එකට students role in the lecture method. Listen and learn. What is it? Listen and learn. Passive learners. Passive learners. Listen and learn. That is the student role. Class size in the lecture method. You can have a large class when you are doing the lecture method. Content. A vast content can be covered, and at the same time, difficult content can be dealt with. When it comes to content in lecture method, what kind of content can be covered? A large content can be covered. A vast area can be covered. And at the same time, a difficult content, complex topics can be covered. Am I right?
Yes.
Merits. මොනවාද වාසි තියෙන මේකේ? Merits of lecture method. Economical in time. Am I right? Am I right? And a large number of students can be taught at the same time. Saves time. And monadic advantages. Difficult topics can be explained without actually making it more confusing for the students. They are the advantages. But what are the disadvantages of lecture method? Students are passive. So students are bored. All will not pay equal attention. Some students just idle in the class. And students are not, students do not develop their critical thinking, creativity. They become very passive in the class. and a board class is there, and this will not lead to the development of the 4 C's: cooperative learning, cooperation, critical thinking, creativity, and communication. Those 4 skills will not be developed. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, that is it. But still we use lecture method. If you take schools, yes, more or less teachers use lecture method. If you take higher education, I think 95% of education is lecture method. Right? It is selected because it has its own advantages, maybe vast syllabuses, large classes, and all that. And it's actually the learner's learning style. When it comes to adult learners, they are analytical learners. They want actually this teacher to like that. But you can tailor-made. If not, you can actually adapt lecture method to make it more effective and somewhat student-centered. You can actually combine lecture method and adapt lecture method by combining some other elements to it to make it a better lecture method, make it more effective. So how can you do that? How can you make your lecture a good lecture then? You can't help it. You have to actually use the lecture method because it's a large class, it's a complex topic, and you have to cover a vast area. So you have selected on the teacher-centered approach and the lecture method. But still, you know its limitations. Because of that, the students can be bored and students may not understand what you are telling. If the teacher is not skilled in explanation, the students will not understand anything of what she says or he says. So how can you actually make a lecture a better one, more effective one? So I have given below some points. First one, a good lecture should not be too long as to exceed the student's attention span. You're not going to talk about one topic for hours and hours. Instead, you will have breaks, and in between you can actually give them some questions. You can ask them some questions. You can get them to do some discussions and all that. So you can add another element every half an hour. Otherwise, the students will lose interest and they will not listen to your lecture. So you're not going to make it a very long one, too long. And in between, you're going to add variety to it. Second one, a good lecture should address a single topic. So one topic is covered, then you have to move on to the second topic by taking actually a topic changing and all that proper approaches are again. Even if you go on talking, your students will not understand. So now I'm talking about lecture method. So when I want to go to the discussion method, you have to say, I finished my discussion on lecture method. Now we are going to talk about the discussion method. Then even if you were not listening, now right, now it is the discussion method. That part goes into your head. So likewise, you have to address a single topic at a time. Third point, in a good lecture, technical terms are carefully explained because you can't ask questions. You are just listening. Because of that, the teacher has to make sure that everything is explained very clearly. Because students are not supposed to ask questions in a lecture. It doesn't happen in a lecture. So teacher has to make sure that she explains all the technical terms and the rest of it very carefully and clearly. The fourth one, familiar examples and analogies are given. Examples and analogies can be comparisons. So always when you conduct a lecture, because students are passive listeners now. So if you are a good lecturer, you will always give examples and draw comparisons for the better understanding of the topic by the students. When you give examples and analogies, comparisons, the students can better understand it, because they are not supposed to disturb you and ask in a lecture. So you have to make sure that they understand it very clearly. So to get them to clearly understand it, always when you explain something, you will give them examples and comparisons or analogies so they can better understand that. Okay. Next one. A good lecture employs a variety of techniques. That means you're not just going on telling. Instead, time to time, you can give them 5 minutes for discussion, 5 minutes for brainstorming, 5 minutes for question and answers. In between, you add other techniques. Then the students will not be bored. Okay, you're conducting a lecture, it's all right. It doesn't matter that you have to be 100% lecture, right? You can add some other elements to actually bring about that variety. Then a good lecture uses various teaching aids and illustrations such as charts, transparent codes, real objects, etc. Because teacher goes on explaining, the teacher can use videos, visual aids, pictures, realias, so the students can easily, maps, charts, then the students can easily understand what you're telling. A graphical representation, a visual representation. So your lecture is combined with all that. Then the students can better understand your lecture. Right? ඒක නිසා lectures තාම පාවිච්චි කරනවා. Though it has its own limitations, it has its own advantages. So because of that, we add some other elements and make it a better one and an effective one. So this is how you can do that. Okay. Got it?
Yes, ma'am.
Now I'm tired because this is the third lecture today. Morning I had one, evening I had one, and now late in the evening I have another one. Very difficult for me today. And can I want to make a 2-3 minutes break. Nisa, I ask you, so far, what did we discuss? Can you tell me? මොනවද අපි discuss කරපු topics? Hmm?
The process involving teaching and learning.
මොනවද අපි මුලින්ම කතා කරේ?
Software learnings, like teaching approach.
What is educational technology?
Technology.
As the process
There
of...
are two types.
Yeah.
Processes involved in learning teaching process.
Very
That is
good.
software and hardware. And then we discussed about what is software first. Software is a selection of appropriate methods, strategies, techniques, and all. Then under how to teach, we discussed about the diagram, approach, method, and techniques. First, we discussed about the approach and the method, and then the technique. Then after that, we talked about the then we talk about the teacher-centered and student-centered approaches.
Very good. Then the criteria for selecting approaches. Am I right? Factors for selecting approaches like size of the class, time, resources available, the content to be taught, like that, no? Yeah. Then after that, we came down to methods, and we started with lecture method, and we saw what are the characteristics of lecture method. And then we actually discussed how to make a lecture method a more effective one. That is what we discussed. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So can one of you tell me how to make the lecture method a more effective one? How to make the lecture method a more effective one?
It should be address a single topic.
At a time. Okay. Then what else?
A good lecture should we should be able to use various teaching aids and illustrations.
Very good. Then
In a good lecture, technical terms can be explained carefully.
very good. What else?
Family examples and analogies are given.
Examples and comparisons.
Comparison.
Okay, very good. And a good lecture is not too long. And
Long.
other techniques are added in between. Am I right? Other
Yeah.
techniques are added in between. Question and answer, discussions, brainstorming, like that. In between, you can add some other techniques also. Right. Okay, that is it, no? Okay. Now we have the demonstration method. Now, demonstration method is also highly what? Teacher-centered or student-centered?
Teacher-centered.
Yeah, it's highly teacher-centered. Why do we say that it's highly teacher-centered? Why do you say that it's highly teacher-centered? Because students just watch and learn, see and learn. They just watch and learn. There's no active participation by students. Why do we use demonstration method? Why? Now, demonstration is teacher goes in front of the class and do and show. මොකද අපි කියලා කියන්නේ? Do and show. එතකොට අපි ඒකට ඇත්තටම කියනවා show do and show method කියලා කියනවා ඒකට. Do and show method. Teacher does it and get the students to see them. Now, what are the subjects that the teachers use this demonstration method? Maybe environmental studies, cookery lesson, how to make something. So teacher goes in front of the class and show it. Maybe it's an English lesson. Making a fruit salad is the lesson, right? And to teach instructions, imperatives. And the teacher can actually use the demonstration method there, right? Show and tell, show and tell. අපි කියන show and tell කියලා. Okay? Why teacher selects the demonstration method? What can be the reasons? Limited resources. මොකක් හින්දාද එහෙම කරන්නේ? පළවෙනි එක. Limited resources. Getting the students to do it on their own. So you have to have lots of resources. And large class. So teacher can't monitor. Even a large class, teacher can go in front of the class and show and tell. Otherwise, if the teacher gets the students to do it in groups and all, the teacher can't monitor a large class. One thing can be large class, the other thing can be lack of resources, right? Because of that, the teacher decides on demonstration. Teacher goes in front of the class and show it to the class, show and tell. You call it show and tell method. Now you have decided on demonstration method. So how can you actually make it a good demonstration? I have given you the points below. Make sure all the students can see and hear you. Nattang, those who can't see, those who can't hear, they will just idle without learning, right? So you have to make sure that you are positioned in a place that everybody can see and hear you properly. Make sure that it happens. I want to tell you my experience. I was observing a student lesson, a postgraduate student. She was using the demonstration method as one of the methods. Okay, it was a student-centered class, but little bit of demonstration was there, and it was a very good one. I could tell it was very appropriate to do a demonstration. Habay, in doing the demonstration, I saw some of the students could not see the teacher, what she was doing. So I had to cut marks. So some are actually neglected. They are not learning anything in the class. And it leads to behavioral problems also, because they start talking, because they are annoyed, but they are unhappy because they can't see the teacher. Unnecessary issues are also created by that. So make sure that everybody, all the students can see and hear you properly. Second one, observe all safety rules and procedures. Normally, if you're doing a demonstration, not for each and every subject that you do a demonstration. When you're doing a demonstration, you use equipment, you use tools, maybe a knife, maybe some chemicals in a science lesson. So make sure that all the rules and procedures are observed for safety. Okay? තේරුණා නේද?
Yes, madam.
Third one, keep eye contact with the class. Ask and encourage class questions. අපි කියනවා සාමාන්‍ය show and tell. Teacher show it and teacher goes on explaining. But you can add a different. You can actually keep eye contact with the students and ask a few questions here and there and encourage the students also to ask questions when they don't actually understand it. That kind of variety can be added to it without just showing and telling. Okay? Eye contact is also very important. Explain why and how. Use the techniques of show and tell. We know that. Use a summary to strengthen your explanation. Now, after the demonstration, definitely that you have to give them a summary of what you did. Right? That is it. This is how you can make a demonstration. Though it is a teacher-centered method, you selected it because you have your own justifications. But still, if you are using it, make it more effective by adding those elements to the demonstration, the show and tell method. Okay,
Okay.
Okay.
right. Now we have another method. මම ඒක ටිකකට තියලා discussion method එක පස්සට ගම්මු. I will get you to look at scientific method because it's a different one. Now, the scientific method is a student-centered method. It comes into the student-centered approach. Now, scientific method is an organized way of answering and solving a problem. Organized way of answering and solving a problem. It's a body of techniques for investigating phenomena, acquiring new knowledge, or correcting and integrating previous knowledge. So the students are not empty vessels. They have the knowledge of the world, knowledge of the language, right? They have the knowledge of the world, knowledge of the language. So the teacher believes in the students' prior knowledge, existing knowledge with regard to world, with regard to language. So the teacher wants to develop the 4 C's, the 21st century skills in the learner: cooperation, critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration, communication. So because of that, teacher thinks that I can actually get them to identify a problem and think of a way of finding a solution to that problem using the scientific method. So problem solving is very important. It's a highly student-centered approach, right? Problem solving abilities developed in the child. So teacher thinks, I will get them to actually use the scientific method, and in that scientific method, they identify a problem and they actually form hypotheses and they do some test intervention or test එකක්, action එකක් කරනවා, then see whether it works or not. Like that, they are into an experiment. They are into an experiment. You get my point? It's a trial and error learning. highly constructivism, trial and error learning. So they actually first try something, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter, they will go for another trial and error. So all these things happen in the scientific method. Are you listening?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah.
Madam.
So scientific method has steps. Scientific method has steps. So for you to know what the steps of scientific method, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, and 6, I will play a video and you have to actually know what these steps are. So can you take down the step 1 to step 6 after watching the video, while watching the video? The steps of the scientific method, right? Okay. I will now show the video. It's a very simple video, right? A song or something like that. But let's see. Give me a second. Okay, let's see this will work. Right, now I'm sharing it. And I have to actually share computer sounds also. You can actually take down the steps of scientific method. So hope that you can see.
Science. In this video, I'd like to go through the steps of scientific method in 3 minutes. Scientific method is a system to find answers to questions or problems. Step 1. Identify the problem. What would you like to know? Problems are written in the form of a question. Step 2 is research. The research can be in the form of looking on the internet, talking to other people, reading scientific books, magazines, etc. Is form a hypothesis, which is an educated guess. The hypothesis should be based on research or life experience. Step 4 is design an experiment. The experiment should be designed to test the hypothesis, and during the experiment, observations are used to collect measurable data. The experiment will include 3 variables. First variable is the independent variable. It is the part of the experiment that you change to see how it affects the dependent variable. The independent variable is always graphed on the x-axis. The dependent variable is the part of the experiment that changes in response to the independent variable. The dependent variable is always graphed on the y-axis. And then you have control variables. These are variables that should be held constant and are used for comparing. In addition, a large sample size of the experiment and results. And many times you need to repeat the experiment several times to ensure against errors that may be introduced. Step 5 is results. This is the information that you have gathered. Quantitative data is data that is numbered. Many times it is recorded on charts, tables, and graphs. Qualitative data includes illustrations and photographs, and this is data that is observed. And finally, step 6 is the conclusion. And during the conclusion, you give a summary of the overall results, and you state whether or not you accept or reject your hypothesis. And then describe if there's any practical application to what you have learned.
Okay, now. Now tell me, this is the scientific method. First, we will look at what are the steps of the scientific method. So what are the steps of the scientific method? The first one,
Identify the
Identify the
problem.
Very good. Identify a problem. Second one?
Hypothesis.
Research.
No.
Research.
Research. What is it? Research or
Research.
resourcing. I will explain them further, right? Third one? Forming a hypothesis. Forming a hypothesis. අප කියනවා educated guess කියලා. Fourth one?
Design an
Design
experiment.
and
Designing what? An
Designing an
experiment.
experiment.
Designing an experiment. Designing and conducting an experiment. And then after that, analysis.
Research.
Research.
Analysis, right? Is it analysis?
Result.
Number 5, result.
Result. Then after that, number 6,
Conclusion.
analysis, and then the conclusion. Whether the hypothesis is proved or not, accepted or rejected. Right? Now, අපි ඕක කතා කරලා බලන්න ඕනේ. Now, it's a very important method that even with grade 6, you're supposed to do this. Even with grade 6, 7, 8 classes, even grade 4, 5 classes, you can actually do this scientific method with your guidance because it leads to the development of critical thinking, problem solving, communication, cooperation, and creativity. So it's very important that you actually use these methods in your school, in your class, when they are appropriate. Okay? Now I will tell you one example. First, first identify a problem. Now it's very good because students are inquisitive. You make them to think of something, reflect on something, and identify a problem. So that kind of a mindset is very important in 21st century education. So you can actually first guide them in identification of a problem. So one example I can tell you, now this time, the harvest, maybe the harvest of some crop, it's very poor. It's very poor, right? It's very poor. Now, if you take rambutan, this time, no rambutan, right? Not like the other previous time. Very few places sold rambutan and it was not abundantly available. So they identify a problem. So that is their inquisitive nature, right? You have to actually create that mindset in your learner, right? Then they have to do literature. What can be the reasons for the low harvest this time when it comes to rambutan? So they can read books on rambutan harvest or cultivation. They can talk to people. Why has it happened? Teachers, adults, and all that. They can read books in the library or on internet. And they can gather information, what factors affect the rambutan crop cultivation and all that. Then after gathering information through research or resourcing, they have to formulate a hypothesis. Hypothesis කියලා කියන්නේ a tentative statement. Tentative statement කියලා කියන්නේ it's not proved. But you actually based on the information gathered, අපි කියනවා educated guess කියලා. You think this is the reason for the low harvest this time කියලා. You decide based on the information and knowledge gathered. You form a hypothesis. And you think this time rambutan cultivation gave a very low harvest due to lack of fertilizer. Due to lack of fertilizer. Okay? Because you think that you got rain and everything, but it is due to lack of fertilizer. That is the hypothesis. So you decide on dependent variable, independent variable, and control variable in designing the experiment. One variable at a time කියලා කියනවනේ පියාජ ගැන කතා කරනකොට කිව්වනේ. One variable at a time, scientific mind. So the child designs an experiment මොකද dependent variable එක? මොකද independent variable එක? මොකද control variable එක? In this experiment, rambutan harvest depends on fertilizer. The fertilizer is independent. Rambutan harvest depends on fertilizer. So rambutan harvest is the dependent variable. Control is maybe water and sunlight. All the plants you have get the same amount of water and sunlight. But you vary the amount of fertilizer you put. Because fertilizer is the independent variable. And dependent variable is the harvest of rambutan harvest. So you design that experiment, you have rambutan palette, and it happens over a period of time, and then you give same amount of water, same amount of sunlight, that is the control variable, and you vary the amount of fertilizer you put. For one plant, it's very low amount. Second plant, average, and there's a very good amount of fertilizer. And then you see when they grow, because same amount of water and sunlight, and which tree actually bears more fruit and harvest. So if your hypothesis is proved or accepted, the plant that you gave more fertilizer has given more what? Harvest. Am I right? Am I right?
Yes, madam.
Yes.
Don't we get our students to even grade 3 and 4 do these kind of experiments in their little ways? මුං යට පැල කරලා වහලා තියන්න, ඇරලා තියන්න and all that, don't we do? We sometimes do. And you don't have to think that it's only science subjects that you can use the scientific method. Now, suppose you're a teacher. Now, your class, you're an English teacher. You can see your students, they are very weak in their writing. So that is the problem identified. My students are very weak in writing. So you read literature, the second stage. You speak to other teachers, you speak to students, you read books on writing skills and all that, and then gather information. And then you put it in your experience with your students and see. I think my students, they don't write because they don't know their grammar. Then grammar contributes to the development of writing skills. That is the hypothesis. What is the dependent variable? Writing skills. Independent, grammar. Control, reading skills and all that are controlled right now. Then you actually plan a kind of experiment. So over 3 months that you're going to teach them grammar, and then based on the grammar, get them to write something. That is the experiment that you conduct, right? Over a period of 3 months. And then you see the results. Their writing has improved. Your hypothesis has accepted or proved. Got it?
Yes, ma'am.
So always as teachers, whatever subject that you teach, not each and every topic that you can actually teach through scientific method, but you can actually get them to actually engage in this scientific method, because it involves critical thinking, reading literature, doing experiments, and then analyzing. It develops the 21st century skills. And this kind of teaching methods are very important in the classroom in this 21st century student-centered education, not typical lectures and all that. So there is no the answer. Sometimes they are not right, they are trial and error. Their hypothesis is not proved, not accepted. But it's okay, mistakes are tolerated. They learn through trial and error. They are not empty vessels. They have their prior knowledge related to world, related to language and all that. They are making use of it in order to build up new knowledge. So all these things happen when the teachers are smart enough, think, where can I use this scientific method? Not only in science class, right? I told you, no, as a teacher educator that I can get you to, right? Likewise, you have to think of. Is it okay? Is it okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Right. The next day, I will actually talk to you about an example of a scientific method, another example of a scientific method. And I will talk to you about the flipped method. Talk to you about some other activities. But remember, after doing the flip method in the class, I will set you the assignment, the written assignment. It's going to be a flipped method activity that you have to prepare. So make sure everyone comes next week, and I will be sending you the materials that I used today, and read them and try to come to a better understanding of what we discussed today. Okay,
Okay, ma'am.
right, okay. Any questions? Can you think of an example of a scientific method to be used as I gave you the two examples? Can you think of a scientific method example and come next day? Can you?
Can, ma'am.
Yeah, please. Right. And read the notes, listen to the audio or video that you're getting, and study on regular basis, as I always tell you. May discuss karaniwa hari වැදගත් when it comes to lesson planning. I get you to write a lesson plan. So because of that, it's all connected to each other. So good to remember what we discussed. Okay. So with that, can I stop for the day?
Okay, ma'am.
Right then. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much,
you,
ma'am.
Okay. Good night, every one of you.
Good night, ma'am.
Good night, dear. Good night, everyone.